The problem is they're the most medicated, they're the most depressed, they're the most anxious, they're the most stressed, they're the most suicidal group of all time. And they think they're connected because every one of them has one of these in their pocket since they're, 9? And so it's presented itself that these needs can help combat those things in a way that we've never had to really look at or address before, especially in the workplace, but in general in society. But it's presented itself in Gen Z in a massive way only because they feel so needy, because they have very little connection.
Welcome to the Backcountry Marketing Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Kyle Duford. He is the President and Executive Creative Director over at The Brand Leader. Kyle, good to see you.
Cole, this is going to be exciting today for sure. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on the mic. We caught you right before you're leaving on vacation, so I can't, well, this could be a really in-depth conversation, or maybe you're already on the beach somewhere, and so I don't blame you. But thanks for taking the time. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding the needs of Gen Z, the intricacies of the generation that is quickly entering the workforce, quickly entering, the market, and talking about how to relate to them, how to connect with them from a brand side. So Kyle, I'm curious if you could kind of give us an opening statement. Why is this a topic you're interested in? And let's start there.
Yeah, great question. And again, thanks for having me, Cole. This is it's always important to talk about these things, and people like you allow us to talk about this. So thanks for that. I think on the whole, we look at culture at the workplace, and we look at people entering the workplace as something almost like taboo to talk about because our parents did it differently, and millennials screwed it up for everybody. And like, how do you handle things at the workplace? And sorry, I know you're a millennial, but the interesting thing is to me, recently we'd just won 7 or 8 Best Places to Work awards in the last 3 years. And someone had said, "Hey, how did you do that?" And I was like, "Oh, I guess I never thought about that." So I started thinking about the things that we did in our business to establish it as a place that people wanted to come to, people wanted to work for, people heard about us. It's something that I call a culture brand, a company or service or product that kind of like just as known for their culture as it is the thing that they create. And so I started really thinking about this and thinking about the things that we had done, concessions we'd made, or changes to policy, or the people we've hired and how we've learned from them. And at the end of the day, it became very clear that we had established these 7 needs that every Gen Z needs. I think that we all need, but in particular 7 that Gen Z is looking for, and probably the late millennials as well. And I just became fascinated with the topic and started changing how we thought about not just our business, but the people that we employ, and then eventually people outside of our walls as well. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, I'm excited to press deeper. Let's pause before we do. Could you kind of give us a little context about the Brand Leader, the type of work that you do, and a little bit about your background?
Yeah, well, my background is not as exciting as all, but we've been in business for 25 years. We're based in Greenville, South Carolina. We've got a secondary big office up in New York City. On Park Avenue. We've got another tiny office out in San Francisco, and we've got some writers in Boulder, Colorado. We pride ourselves on being strategic thinkers, brand creators, and great designers. So we're creatives that solve problems for companies and brands. We are a full-service agency, so we do everything from photo and video to copywriting, digital work, development, marketing, and so forth. But we really are problem solvers and storytellers at heart. And so you'd think of us as a creative agency, you can think of us as a branding agency, but we are the go-to shop if you want to get some great work done that looks amazing.
And you guys do work in the outdoors, but also with some adjacent industries as well, and also non-outdoor companies as well. So I think you've probably got a nice sample size of perspective when it comes to clients to bring to this show in particular. Yeah,
some great clients we have. I mean, currently we're working with Hincapie Sports. George Hincapie, former loyal lieutenant of Lance Armstrong. He has his clothing line here for cyclists. Power Bar, when they kind of relaunched a number of years ago. Rudy Project Sunglasses, a big client of ours. Buoy, which is an waterproof bag, phone pouch, backpacks, things like that. Supra, cycling, trying to think who else. Just a ton of brands. Princeton Tech was a client for a long time. So those are a lot of our outdoor and lifestyle brands, but we have a number of wine and spirits companies that we work with. We have a number of other CPG type brands, medtech, fintech, all over the place, travel and tourism as well. So we try to look at something which we're kind of industry agnostic. It's kind of like riding a bike. If you can ride a bike, doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter what type of bike it is. It might look different, it might act a little different, it might ride a little better or not, but you still know how to ride a bike. And so we look at brands and branding in that same fashion. That there's verticals we prefer to be in, and outdoor is one of them. My background is in that a little bit. So, so all over the place, but it's fun to do it.
I'm curious if there's a moment in time when you realized that you aren't Generation Z.
Yeah.
Was there a moment when you realized, like, hey, not everyone actually thinks like I do? I need to change my perspective or understand these other generations below mine so that I can create a better workforce, so that I can help our clients. Was there a moment when you realized that it wasn't all about the way you think?
I mean, so many things are not about the way I think.
Well,
but I've got 6 children, and they're all firmly in Gen Z, from the oldest at 23 to the youngest at 10. They're just obviously in different periods of that 15-year gap. And they think differently. And what's interesting is the 15-year-old thinks the same as the 20, 23, and 10-year-old, and vice versa. But the 30-year-old who I have in my office thinks differently than my 23-year-old. And it was very interesting to see what that break was. So I can't tell you there was a specific time that I thought, what is it that is making them different, and I need to think about it. But I can tell you very specifically the difference in hiring people that are around that age of my eldest children, and a little bit older than that, and realizing there was a vast discrepancy on how they viewed the world really piqued my interest. And when you start looking into it, it's very clear. It's the internet started, and right smack in the middle. 20 years ago, 23 years ago, whatever, you had Amazon and Yahoo stores and whatever. And just before that, I don't even know when, like 1996, 95, we started getting emails. I didn't have an email that was a non-school email until like 98. I had my first Gmail account. So it's right around that time period that everything changed. And that's what was really fascinating, because as we all know, technology, the access to technology, access to information has changed the way our children in that next generation appropriate information, take it in, store it in their brain. Their attention span is different. What they're interested in is different, and it's completely different. And that's just turned it into the workforce, because now the older ones of Gen Z are starting to enter the workforce in droves. So yeah, it's this weird kind of gray area of when it all started like making sense to me, or not making sense to me at all, but getting me to start thinking about it.
I realized this morning that Gen Z is the first generation that grew up with social media, like permeated throughout their life. Millennials knew a time when there was no social media, and that's when it hit me. I was like, oh, like that makes sense. Yeah,
and it's further than that. Just this morning, I read a statistic that I shared with a company where Gen Alpha, which is the next one coming, which is like the young kids now, I think they're like under 10. Because my youngest daughter is right at the cusp, well, maybe under 8. That they're starting to have recall of brands through what medium. And when I was 8, when I was 10, it was through the 3 stations we got on television, and it was Saturday morning cartoons. For them, 51% say YouTube. They're the most aware of brands that they were served to on YouTube. 51% over TikTok, over friends talking to them, over anything else. That is shocking to me. The amount of time that my children, the younger 3, spend on TikTok is, mind-blowing. And so everything has just shifted. So to your point on, technology and social media, everything. In a talk I give somewhere around this topic that we're talking about, I have a slide that shows all of the technology that's been invented since Gen Z was born. And it's literally everything, food ordering systems, or social media for fitness like Peloton and Strava and things like that. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have all the, Airbnbs and Ubers and Lyft. Every single thing you can think of that you do in your daily life didn't exist before they were born. And so they not just grew up with social media, they grew up with all of these technologies. And it's we can never imagine what that was like, because it just wasn't like that when we were children. Maybe a little bit for you, but for me, it was, there's literally nothing to do except jump on your BMX bike and ride for hours.
Tell me that stat again. 51% of kids under 10, if they could recognize a brand, it was because of YouTube?
Because of YouTube, yeah. It was, that was the place that had the most recall. So I think like second was, and I can find it for you, you can share it in the show notes later, but I think second was, it wasn't what you would think. The third was TikTok, and it went down from there. So by a mile. So 51%.
And then I wonder, like, what is the content that they're seeing on YouTube that is creating that recall? Is it brand created content? Is it partnerships with creators? Is it just unboxing videos?
This particular thing was pre-roll. It was pre-roll for videos. So it's those 30 seconds that we all wait, those 5-second countdowns to skip. That's what gave them the most impact in their little minds.
Fascinating. So, all right, let's jump back. You mentioned there's 7 needs for Gen Z. And I think this is really fascinating, both from a workplace perspective, but also from a marketing perspective, because if you understand people's motivations and what they need, I mean, that's kind of where marketing starts. So let's what are these 7?
Well, I've never thought about it, how to use it in marketing. That's a really interesting angle. But they're simple.
Maybe that doesn't apply, but maybe we can stress test that idea.
I'm sure it does. So I think number 1 is trust. You have to have trust. Well, let me run through them all. We can go back. You can pick one that you want to talk about. So number 1 is trust. Number 2 is grace, which is undeserved favor. Number 3 is empathy. 4 is acceptance. And acceptance could mean anyone who doesn't look, act, smell, talk, breathe like you. It's anyone. It's anything. Anyone is welcome at the table, kind of thing. So acceptance. Rituals and recognition is 5. Vulnerability is 6. And the last one is transparency. And I had to look at my notes here because it's kind of like naming all 50 states. There's always a few you miss, and I always forget one, so I had to look at my notes.
What was point number 6?
6 was vulnerability, and 7 was transparency.
Okay. How did you arrive at these 7?
Yeah, I mean, your questions are great because I don't have answers to them, so I can talk around them if you want. Yeah, it was really one of those things where I started building the list thing. We can't do anything without trust, and then an actual event happened where at the business where after I addressed it, I looked back and I'm like, gosh, that wasn't trust, that was grace. Okay, how do we have? Well, that was a huge, and it was an older gentleman too that it happened with. But I'm like, that translates because we need to show grace for making mistakes and learning through mistakes. And that's how I learned, was someone allowed me to get up and try something different and learn from it. And then I was like, okay, but I happened to have 2 women come into my office, two younger gals who came into my office within a month of each other, and both of them had parents that were splitting up. And I don't know what that was like. My parents split up long before I had recall memory. And so I was like, I'm not equipped for this, but they were really hurting. And so empathy was learning that I don't have to have gone through that situation to understand how they feel. And so, and there's a lot of Brene Brown stuff on that, and just kind of understanding that you can be there for somebody without having to go through their experiences. But then I'm a big proponent on fighting for marginalized communities. I've learned that from my wife, who's just amazing at it, and she's done it her whole life. And anyone who's marginalized, who's on the outskirts, who is looked at lesser than, unfortunately in the South, that happens to be a large portion of lots of different people. And I went, okay, so acceptance, that has to be one. And it just kind of kept going from there. It was like, okay, we can't really operate without this, and I can't be a leader without vulnerability, and they need to see transparency. And it was like, that's how it kind of built on itself. It was all about how we hired people and actual experiences of working with them. And who knows, there might be 3, 10, 15 more, who knows. But for us, that's what worked. And since then, as we've kind of mapped the new hires, and even people I give talks to colleges about this as well. And when I meet with them, it seems that those hit it. They kind of hit all the touch points and all the fear zones, and that's pretty important.
Do you feel like these 7? I mean, these 7 seem like great guiding principles. Are they that different for a millennial generation or a boomer generation? Would it be a different list of 7? Do you think?
No, you could say that it's kind of, while I've positioned it as, it's in the workplace that you need to address these to make sure that they have a safe environment to be a part of and a welcoming environment and a place that they feel safe and all these things. I think if you look at humans in general, we crave and desire these characteristics, whether it being shown to us or whether it's the openness factor or whatever it might be. Like I do think it's a core need of humans, but it's presented itself in Gen Z in a massive way only because they feel so needy because they have very little connection. So this group, if you think about it, they're the most hyperconnected of all time. And, we just talked about the technologies they've been around. And they think they're connected because every one of them has one of these in their pocket since they're, 9? The problem is they're the most medicated, they're the most depressed, they're the most anxious, they're the most stressed, they're the most suicidal group of all time. And so it's presented itself that these needs can help combat those things in a way that we've never had to really look at or address before, especially in the workplace, but in general in society. And it's starting to get worse every generation since the greatest generation. And if you look at mental health scores, self-proclaimed mental health status from boomers on down, or silent generation on down, it drops every generation precipitously. Saying like, how would you say? I think the question was, how would you say your mental health is doing? Would you say it's good or fair condition, whatever? If they say yes, it's like 75% of silent generation. And the ones who say yes, we have a good grip of our mental health and we're happy and we're performing well, drops and drops and drops and drops and drops and drops. And it's almost really sad. And where it hit me was, again, 6 children firmly in that age group, and more than half of them medicated already. I'm trying to think, maybe 4. And it's like, holy shit, what's happening? Like, this is insane. And so from a very different perspective than medical doctors, which I'm not, therapists, which I'm not, psychologists, and that they have a better understanding of that. All I can do is look at this from the perspective of a father and an employer and say, what is my part? How can I help them? I don't want someone to come here and feel like they're going to get yelled at because they didn't do a good job. No, we all know there's part of taking your lumps, but you have to know your audience, know who you're speaking with, because God forbid, I don't want to be the one who pushes someone over the edge. Like, that's insane. And yet people still do. And it's the people who do and the people who rule with iron fist are these either boomers that are still around running large corporations, and they say it's always been done this way, we have to do it this way, or older Generation X, again, my generation, but even a little bit older than me, who was informed by that generation, and we were the ones who went to college because they told us we had to. It's that kind of like, we have to do it because they told us to do it. And so there's even a breaking point there that people in my generation have to understand. You have to change the way you think to better suit these individuals. So it's kind of all wrapped up in this whole like workforce, generation, technology. It's all kind of one big cluster.
You mentioned that mental health is on the decline since the silent generation. So it's not the internet's fault that mental health is on the decline, though it maybe has exaggerated
Probably
some of it.
Sped it up a little bit.
But what's to blame for the silent generation, that decline when the internet, pre-internet?
I don't know. I can't tell you I'm an expert on that at all, but the little I have read on that bit is just that it is, every time there's an advent of technology of whatever sort, and it could have been television and then cable and then airplanes. I mean, think about when my parents flew on an airplane for the first time. They were in their late 20s and they got dressed up to fly on a plane. You could still smoke in the plane and all these crazy things, right? It was a big deal to fly on a plane. When that became more mundane and now anyone can buy a ticket across the country and sometimes you do it for $100, sometimes a lot more, then that technology, I'm not saying airplanes had anything to do with this, but in the analogy, anytime there was a technology shift, we relied on people less. And so the little I've read is that every time there was a movement in this kind of industrialized world, this technological world that we're in, it just got worse. I think the internet was one manifestation of that. But because the internet is just so prevalent, it just took everyone by surprise. And I don't think we actually understood the danger of it until we were already well in it.
Yeah, I think many people would agree with that statement. So these 7 needs are fascinating, and I'm curious if we can look at these from a from a marketing perspective. So
Sure.
in the work that you guys do, like you mentioned that Gen Z is the most hyper-connected yet disconnected. What does
Mhm.
that mean for the marketing landscape? What does that mean for brands today?
Well, I mean, that's really, and again, this is a 15-minute-old idea because you just mentioned that, and I hadn't thought about it in these terms, and maybe I should have. But I remember saying that when I was in e-commerce, a good part of my career was spent there with some known brands. I remember saying that customer service was so important. And somebody asked me why. And I said, because in this day and age, and this is 12 to 17, 18 years ago, around that span, I remember saying, in this day and age, people don't really need to leave their homes. And the only human contact that they might have is with somebody on the other end of a customer service line. It's why I think Zappos has been so effective. And if you know anything about Zappos, and the late Tony Hsieh really believed in, it didn't matter what they were selling. They were a book of the same title. He was delivering happiness. He said, we happen to be selling shoes, but we were about happiness. So I really thought that there's something there that brands in particular should pay attention to, the fact that they might have somebody engaged with them more than anyone else in that person's day. They have that ability through customer service of all things. So I think it's there. But when you look at marketing, this is going to come full circle. How we define brands, and many people define brands and branding in many different ways, but the definition that I find most satisfactory is that a brand is an emotional connection between a business or service or whatever with a customer or potential customer. That emotional connection is what people feel when they think about J. Crew, Madewell, Sony, Tesla, whatever. And that emotional connection is just that, emotional. And so when you look at these needs, and you look at so many of them are based on, forgiveness and empathy and, love and care, and, and it's not wishy-washy. It's not too kumbaya. It's literally just the human nature to crave connection. And so, yeah, I think there's something there, but it's why polar bears for a Coke commercial make us feel a certain way, or the baby Clydesdales do during the Super Bowl, or I just saw a great British ad the other day where it was a boy and his penguin, and at the very end, it's the penguin meets his other penguin. It was a gift, and then you realize you cut to it, and it's actually just two toy penguins. And this whole time, this kid has been dreaming this, and it's just all, I bawled. It had nothing to do with the store. It had nothing to do with it, but you remember it because it's emotional. And so marketing is that, and marketing helps drive that awareness factor that helps propel that emotional connection, which drives brand loyalty. So if we can do what we do at our company and others like yours and other places, if we can really not just pull on heartstrings or play with emotions, but if we can really deliver something that is evocative in some way, then, and maybe hit some of these needs, then I would say the same thing to us today as I did 15 years ago to an e-commerce brand, and that is, that might be the only connection people have to something meaningful in their day, which is sad,
Okay.
but also kind of true. So that is really, think about in your day. Think about the things you do. The book we have coming out in a couple months called The Brand Book is all about what branding is and what it looks like in modern society. And I said something like, think about the brands you see before you even get to the office. You see your iPhone when you first wake up, you brew your Folgers coffee, your Stumptown coffee, probably where you are, and you get into your Jeep and you go to Starbucks, and then it's like so many brands, and that person might not have had to ever say a word to anybody before they got to the office. And that, to me, is really compelling. There's something there. There's something that, while it's unfortunate, it could be magical. You could have a chance to change people's day. And that's something that I take very seriously. So can you use this in marketing? Absolutely. It's always probably been there. Even Smoke Lucky Strikes that you'd see on the back of a 1963 Saturday Evening Post ad still pulled at your heartstrings in some way. It did an emotional thing. You wanted to be like the Marlboro Man, or you wanted to drive that Porsche, or you wanted to have that VW. It's always been an emotional thing, but maybe now it has to be more overt, I guess.
Do you feel like brands these days are equipped to serve Gen Z? or are they under? Do they know like what's about to hit them? Who is about to become their customers? Or like who's about to
Well,
hit the
I
market?
don't think they know what's going to hit their workforce. As customers, they've probably been there already. So if you think about a 23-year-old graduating college, 22-year-old entering the workforce, they've probably used products on their own much before that, right? So I imagine it hits the consumerism angle long before the workforce. So thinking about it that way, I don't know if there's a lot of brands who do it really, really well, like really well. I mean, Target has a great way of pivoting, which is brilliant. I think even larger brands like IKEA, they I just saw an ad the other day. It was pets. It was Gen Z has a lot of pets, and they have apartments. They're not buying things. They're so transient. They don't own cars. All these things, and late millennials too. And it was an IKEA ad that all their pets were knocking things over and staining things. And the good thing that IKEA was so cheap because you could just replace it quickly. And it actually showed a broken piece of IKEA pot. It was like, and then it would show the name and and the made up Swedish name they have, and then like $4.99. But you never actually saw the thing intact, which I thought was brilliant. But it's hitting people on a different type of advertising level, and it's kind of dedicated to them. I mean, you can advertise on Mr. Beast, and you're gonna have everyone on the planet know who you are, but it's at a cost. But yes, brands are starting to kind of figure it out. I think everyone tried to figure out this NFT thing, which was a joke. I mean, in the metaverse, and it was like millions and millions of dollars by companies.
Billions.
Well, billions in total, yeah. Millions from the companies. I just heard last week that Starbucks just scuttled theirs. And I'd watch that one from a distance because I'm fascinated by like the red cup. And you could trade images of the red cup, which didn't exist, and people were buying them from each other for like $5,000. I'm like, what is happening with our country? But they're starting to play in that space and try to figure out how to attract them. I mean, the fact is that if you didn't do that, you're also ran these days.
Yeah, interesting.
I mean, this is a fascinating. People should be talking about this much more skilled than I am in colleges and universities, because there's this mixture of sociology and psychology and advertising that is all kind of mixing right now differently than it ever has before. And I just find it fascinating.
I feel like it's more complicated than it ever has been, both from a emotional personality perspective, and then also just from the amount of options and tools and ways that you can connect with people. Like it's...
Well, yeah. Go back to the Saturday Night Evening Post example. Whoever had the most money to buy the back page or to buy a lower right hand and share their logo or could sponsor I Love Lucy, those brands won. But remember, in the 50s, you had 1, 2, 3 stations on television. Everybody gathered around the TV, that great quote in Back to the Future where Marty says, we have a TV, we have two. And the guy looks at him and he goes, no, the kid looks at him and says, well, no one has two televisions. It was... But when Jackie Gleason was on, everyone piled into the living room. It was one touch point, right? Or you saw a billboard, or you went to the Texaco gas station and you saw, things that they were advertising and so forth. And then grocery stores started, becoming popular, and they started tying, sponsorships and TV shows together. It was all but it was 1, 2, 3 touch points if you include radio. Now, like you just said, there's so many ways to attract people. It's so splintered. So it's social media organic, it's social media paid, it's what kind of social media, where, is it video, is it static, is it targeted, is it dynamic? And you're just talking about social media, like paid search, organic search, content marketing, video, photos, testimonials, reviews, retargeting ads. I mean, it just goes on and on. And then the tried and true is still there, out of home, and out of home is still around, print is still around, then you've got streaming and OTT. Like there's so many different ways to hit people. That's where you have to be smart. Where is it? The foundation has never changed. It's always been the right message to the right people at the right time. But now you just might have 30 of those, right?
Do you feel like marketers, do we overthink things? Do we make it more complicated than it needs to be? And I think we probably all fall into this trap where we've got 30 or 100 options of ways to connect with someone. But do we overthink it?
One of my favorite scenes in in Mad Men is the very first episode in the very first season, where Don Draper's sitting at a diner and he's trying to figure out what the line is for Lucky Strikes. And he asked the waiter, like, what do you smoke? And I forget what he said. He's like, I like my Luckies. And he's like, why? And he's like, because whatever, I can't remember the line, but he was like, because they taste good and they're the best. And he's like, that's it. And he writes it down, and that became the line, right? And whatever that line was. And that's simple. And there's so many products we've named or businesses we've branded where we are really just pitching back to the client what they've told us, but just in a different way. That's more accessible to people. And so in that regard, it's very simple, but sometimes the simple is the hardest to get to. And so I do think we overthink it. I think we overthink it a lot. And not to say that advertising is easy, marketing is easy, and that anyone can do it. You do have to be skilled in this, but it is understanding that concept of the right message, right time, right person, and what does that person need to hear. Now, to turn this full circle, you don't know at any given moment what Gen Z needs to hear, because they're constantly moving. They're constantly on the next thing. Their ADD is off the charts. The highest ADD, by the way, of any generation as well. So trying to figure out, or ADHD, trying to figure out where to hit them is very difficult, and the right message. That's the difficult part. But the messaging can be simple. So when you have a convoluted message, what's the first thing kids do these days? They turn it off. They don't want to think through it. They don't want to understand it. They just want to be told something simple. So
sometimes I think that about our show, like, this is, I think, episode 164. And I'm like, are we just making, like, the goal is to share ideas and like, a rising tide lift all boats. Like that's the motivation behind the show. But I'm like, are we just making this too complicated by having too many conversations, like deep dives into random marketing topics? I don't know. I don't think we're going to stop doing it, but it does cross my mind. We're like, marketing is really, it's a simple thing.
Yeah, it is very
execution
simple.
Though.
Yeah.
Execution is tough.
Right.
So I looked up a few stats before this show about Gen Z, and I wanted to just run these by you and kind of hear your thoughts.
Okay.
So 82% they said they trust a company more if it uses images of actual customers in advertising. 68% read multiple reviews before making a purchase. 65% of Gen Z say they'd rather take a dream vacation than purchase a car. 97% use social media as their primary source of inspiration.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me at all. The trust factor is really interesting, because one of the stats that I have in my talk is that I think it was 58% of people would rather trust a stranger than their own boss. And I'm like, that's
really
bonkers to me. It's so bonkers to me. Like, how does that even...
Of Gen Z or just...
Gen Z.
Or anyone?
Gen Z.
Okay.
And it's so funny. And so trust is a really, really big deal for them, but trust needs to be earned. It's not just freely, it's not freely given. It's not grace. It's trust. And so you have to earn that relationship. And so when someone says, come because we're the best, Gen Z is the most skeptical of that. They want to know why, which is why that review is so high, that review percentage. So there's something there where they need to see actual people because it's authentic. This started with your generation. This started with millennials, because millennials started becoming really hyper concerned with supply chain and sourcing and making sure that there's transparency in the supply chain, that they knew where that battery was made, or what if the workers were being treated fairly, and where it came from. And if that is very important to that generation, and that's gone even further. It's not gone by the wayside, but it's gone even further and deeper with Gen Z, because they want to see that, and they want to be able to trust that it's true, trust the person they've given it to, that information. And when they see that person talking about it, or that brand talking about it, or that business talking about it, no matter where they are, probably on social media, they want to know that they can trust that person. And the way to do that is to see themselves in that brand. And that's where that real people comes in. I mean, you can sniff out stock photos in a heartbeat, and they've got a superpower with that. So none of those stats surprised me, although I didn't know the specifics of them.
So I also have a feeling that trust in like institutions and mega corporations is probably on the decline. I'm curious though, that trust that is placed in a brand, like, is there ever a point where the brand becomes an institution that can no longer be trusted? And then everything that a brand stands for, like, is, because it's a brand, it's no longer capable of being trusted, just like some people feel towards...
Of course. Let's think of something that's really kind of top of mind right now for me. Boeing, right? when you'd think about Boeing, you would think about advancement technologically. Like, I mean, everybody knew what Boeing was, even though you might not have known that they had a space program that was 5 years late. You might not know that they were, that they worked on X, Y, and Z planes, but you knew that they were in aviation. You could trust them, because until Airbus came along, like it's like every plane was a Boeing, right? Like most of them were. And so now all of a sudden, you went from a brand that maybe they weren't really a brand, maybe they were just a company at the time because people didn't think much about them. But now they've lost brand equity because they're being viewed as unsafe. They're all about production. They're all about the bottom line. They're all about planes, not people. And it's hurting them. I mean, their stock is down 27%, I think, as of yesterday. The CEO just stepped down. Like, that's where, and most of that comes from the business leaders not stepping forward and being transparent in what's going on. There's a great book. I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was in Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, but it might not have been, where you talk about the Tylenol, the 1980s Tylenol cyanide problem. And people were scared to death to have Tylenol because, do you even know about this?
I'm not familiar with
Yeah,
it.
it was a big deal. I mean, I was probably like 10, where Tylenol was being tainted, and like, I don't know if it was a stock hit or whatever, but it was like a scary thing. Like, kids were dying, people were dying because of cyanide poisoning. But what the Tylenol execs did was brilliant. And what they did was they said, yes, this is an issue, and they pulled everything, they recalled everything, they lost millions of dollars. And 40 years ago, that was a crazy amount of money. They lost it all. They said, we're not doing anything until we fix this. Well, they didn't fix the problem itself. They came up with a better solution. By that, I mean this. Child tampering. The foil that says it hasn't been tampered with at all of that was invented by them. And it's gone through permutation since then and technological advancements, but they said, we're going to show you that we care about you, that anything you put in your body, we are telling you what to look for. If this has been tampered with, don't take it. If this has been tampered with, once you open the box, send it back to us. Well, that instilled trust in a point where the world was saying, don't take Tylenol. And instead of fixing that problem, they fixed a bigger one. And it was all about trust. Now, they became a trusted brand because of that. Those are the kind of things that brands have the power of doing. But too many times we try to fix I tell people all this all the time, let's not fix the runny nose, let's fix the cold. Because if you look at the symptom, it's unfixable unless you fix the problem. And so in that case, in Boeing's case, sometimes they just run around the problem. And I get it. They're multinational conglomerates. They have stockholders they have to appease, and there's a lot of things on the line. But at the end of the day, when the public doesn't trust you, that's a big deal. So you can see that happen a lot in modern day society.
So Tylenol was putting cyanide in there?
They weren't. People were tampering with it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, people were tampering with it. And I mean, we were scared shitless as kids that somebody was going to put razor blades in apples. And I guarantee you, Gen X, who's listening right now, at some point growing up, they were told, don't take apples on Halloween when you're trick-or-treating. Because we all believed
my mom basically said that.
Right, because we believed every single person was putting razor blades in apples. Now, that's absurd. But that's what I mean. Like, people were just doing bad things. It happened to do in Tylenol, they put cyanide in it. And it was a horrible thing. I don't know how many people were sick. It was a lot of people, and I think a few died. But again, they came at it and said, we're going to help combat this issue, not just cover up the problem. And that's what people want to see.
What do you feel like are some misconceptions that people have about Gen Z when it relates to either the workforce or the marketing side of Gen Z?
They're lazy. They have no work ethic. They care more about themselves than other people. They don't know who they are. They only want to use, genderless bathrooms, like all these stupid things people label them with. There's a lot of these misconceptions about them. If you boil it down to, they're our sons and daughters or brothers and sisters, and who are all just trying to be in a world which the world's kind of turned on them. I mean, being born in today's world is not a gift. The world's on fire. Everyone is, screwed up. It seems everything's polarized. I mean, you have to take sides. And so this generation is trying to figure that out. And what we're doing is we're putting labels on them to say, oh no, we're going to have you figured out in our terms. And the resistance is coming from, wait a second, but we have a say too. And so that rub is really what we're talking today. But there's so many misconceptions about them. And again, I can say that because I've got 6 children, all in various parts of the scale of Gen Z, and they're all wonderful human beings, and they're all struggle as well, but they all have a different view of the world, which is so fantastic to see. We just have to caution them to, my 10-year-old girl shouldn't be wearing makeup right now because her pores haven't even developed, but she sees Instagram or TikTok, which she's not supposed to have, and she wants to doll herself up. That's the dangerous side. But the inquisitive nature, the freedom of being a child, all that is still there in some form. It's and as they grow, they still have that inquisitive nature, this generation. But now you've got these polarizing, whether it's political or religious or any number of people putting their views upon them, and they just can't handle the binary world which we grew up in. And so that's why we have to adjust how we think and how we speak and how we do things to appropriate ourselves to them, because they're the ones who are in charge, really. Don't tell my kids that, but
I want to switch gears on you really quick. I'm curious. So in the headlines these days is the whole TikTok discussion of banning it in the U.S. From a Gen Z perspective, if that were to be banned, like what's the potential fallout that you see happening there?
Well, if it is banned completely, like whoever's next in line, if it's YouTube or Instagram stories or something, or another company they're going to benefit from it. But look, I don't know. Like, I'm not an expert in, foreign affairs and espionage. And do I think the Chinese are selling our information if we're on TikTok? Like, I don't know. If they are, we should probably put limits on it. But I'm not going to make that decision. I can tell you though that TikTok is the number one place people are being introduced to new music, the number one place they're being introduced to different cultures and ways of thinking and religions and so many different things. There's so many wonderful things about it, of social media. There's so many wonderful things, but it's in the consumption and the hours we spend on which become harmful. So yeah, the fallout would be huge because I can't imagine where they'd go to. Now, going back to the earlier conversation about YouTube, I'm sure a lot of them will jump to YouTube, but I think someone's going to pop out of the woodwork and kind of create a TikTok-like thing. And but then creating a social media platform is very difficult. I mean, just ask Threads. You can't do it very easily. Google Plus, all these, Truth Social, it's so difficult. That they figured it out because of how they serve you, your friends, how they serve you through the algorithm, the way you can see it and view it. I mean, there's so many things they figured out so well. Yeah, there's probably going to be an outburst. But again, who's controlling the country? It's not Gen Z. So you've got, if Gen Z was controlling the country, I don't think we'd have such a binary view of politics in the world, because they're so open and they're so fluid with their thinking, not just what you might think of. And so it's really strange because, again, this is the naivety of the older generations, and I'd say mine included, is making decisions for people based on your worldview and not theirs. It is it's always dangerous to impose your worldview on other people. I happen to be a Christian. I don't tell people what to believe. Like, you believe if you want to ask me what I believe, I'm happy to tell you, and why I believe in X, Y, and Z. But I'm not going to force myself on you. And so many people, my age group and older, feel like it's their not just right, but their calling to impose what they think on other people. That is going to massively backfire in this country, and it's a ticking time bomb for it to happen. As soon as Gen Z is in positions of power, and we see it already with social media influencers and people who are making tons of money now, even at a young age, but when they enter government, when they enter business, as powerful businesses employing lots of people, it's going to turn this nation on its head. So yeah, I don't know what you asked originally, but I just went on a
I have this really bad joke, and I say if TikTok gets banned, I think many brands are going to breathe a sigh of relief, because many brands struggle to figure out how to be on the platform.
Yeah.
That's
yeah. Well, and that's a really interesting point, because brands that I love and adore, J. Crew or Starbucks or Netflix or Nike, the ones that I talk about a lot, about, very known brands that, even those brands, they're so big, they haven't figured out how to play in that space, but they're so well known that it's almost too big to fail. And we've all been guilty of clicking on an Instagram ad or a TikTok ad and buying something we don't need. And it's really interesting because the power of the small brands or the rise of influencer brands, all of these kind of micro brands that have popped up have figured all that stuff out, where the established brands, the bigger companies, haven't, because either they think they're too big to fail or they haven't figured out how to adjust their messaging or delivery to that audience. So it's all fascinating on how it's all going to come to a head.
If only we had a way of predicting what will happen, but if we knew that,
right?
Then
we wouldn't be sitting here if we knew how to do that.
No, we would not. Kyle, we've talked about a variety of different topics today. Kind of jumped around this Gen Z generation and dissected it from a few different perspectives. As we wrap up, is there anything that you want to leave our audience with? Any last thoughts for them as they are bringing Gen Z into the office, or if there's marketers sitting out there trying to figure out how do we interact and connect with this new generation? Anything you want to leave them with?
The most surprising stat I've ever seen, and it breaks my heart, the number one reason why Gen Z says they're so depressed and anxious, the number one reason. Do you want to take a guess at what that might be?
Social media?
School shootings. Or public shootings in general. But school shootings is what is most noted. 75% of Gen Z who has been surveyed, and it's just multiple surveys, say that the number one thing they're anxious about is that someone's going to shoot up their school, church, a grocery store, building, arena, park, like you name it. And that to me is just so sad. And I mean, we never had to feel that way. We never didn't feel safe. We talked about riding our bikes until it was dark on our, when we were growing up. I was like 8 years old and I was outside by myself. I came home by myself when I was 6 years old off the school bus. Like, we never had to worry about those things. We had to worry a little bit because there were still milk carton ads with, missing children. But in general, we felt safe. And now our children don't feel safe at all. And what is really part of that, I know this is part of Daniel Coyle's book, The Culture Code, which I love. It's a great book I recommend for any leader today. But he starts off by saying any great leader establishes safe spaces. And he looks at different groups that have been highly successful and what made them highly successful. And it starts with the Navy SEALs and then basketball teams and other places. And it's all about an area of safety. So the thing that I would leave you with is, whether you're a Gen Z or yourself, or whether you're entering the workforce for the first time or you're an employer, is either seek out places where you feel safe, where you feel like you can be yourself, where you don't have to fear being who you are. You don't have to fear retribution. And if you're an employer, I would say absolutely be aware that this is not your father's culture. This is not your culture. This is their culture. Right now, less than 5% of the workforce is made up of Gen Z. But by next year, 20%, because all of them are coming out of college, 20%. And if you add that to millennials, 60% of the workforce next year will be made up of millennials and Gen Z. And for some reason, boomers still think that they rule the world, and Gen X is right along with them. So you have to create environments for them. And it's not just putting up an any gender bathroom sign instead. It's about treating people the way they need to be treated. And if you can do that, and if you can do it in a safe environment, you can do it without, expectation. If you can do it honestly, and that's becomes part of your culture, not just a check on a box, then I think we have an opportunity to help Gen Z feel that way, feel safe, and eliminate that anxiety, or at least a little bit of it. So they have a modicum of success in this world, because I think that's what we really want. And if we can do that, then I just think that's a good thing.
Okay. Well said. Kyle, if folks want to connect with you, if they want to chat more, if they want to learn more about the Brand Leader, where can they go to find you?
I would say the Brand Leader is a hell of a lot more interesting than I am, and that can be found at thebrandleader.com. We'd be happy to hear from anyone who needs help in branding and advertising strategy and so forth. If you want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn. It's Kyle Duford. You can't miss me. There's only one of me. Actually, there's two guys named Kyle Duford, and I've said this before. The other guy's a kid who lives in Canada, and every once in a while I'll send him a note saying, "Stop stealing my underwear," because I think it's hilarious. He does not find it funny at all. So, but look for the older Kyle Duford, and that's me.
Well, Kyle, thank you for taking the time to sit down and chat. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you as well, Cole. Thank you so much.
See ya.